Thank you for joining me today. And I'm going to start by spending a few minutes providing a brief overview of the land trust movement and the tools they use to protect land. But first, a bit about the Land Trust Alliance. So first slide, please, Brian. So the Land Trust Alliance was formed more than 30 years ago to share knowledge and best practices among land trusts, known as the Land Trust Exchange at that time, and incorporated in Massachusetts. Today, and at that time, there were just a handful of land trusts engaged, and today there are more than 1,200 member land trusts of the Alliance, as Brian mentioned in the introduction. We have a staff of 70, a board of 22 highly talented and committed board members across the country, and an advisory council of 40 to help us really think strategically about how to serve our land trusts across the country. We promulgate land trust standards and practices, which were developed by and for the land trust community to promote the ethical and legal standards that are important for running an effective land trust. Next slide, please. We have three key goals. The first, to increase the pace of conservation, is mostly about increasing the funding for conservation, about working for federal policies that support conservation, and also about promoting national messaging around the importance of conservation and the benefits to communities in pursuing and supporting conservation. The second goal, enhance the quality of conservation. It's really about strengthening land trusts through accreditation, education, individual leadership, and organizational development. And this is where much of our work is focused through the field programs. We now have 301 accredited land trusts that hold 75% of the conserved land across the country. That's quite an accomplishment, and accreditation is a market distinction for land trusts that have achieved it. So congratulations. And Skagit Land Trust, who you'll be hearing from Michael momentarily, was one of the first to get accredited. So the third strategic goal, to ensure the permanence of conservation, is where we work through information sharing and education, and now an insurance program called Terra Firma, because we know that any violation that is successful can have a huge repercussion on all protected properties. So our member-owned Terra Firma insurance program now has 476 members, and 88% of acres in this country under conservation easement are now either held by a Terra Firma member or an organization that has the capacity to self-insure. Next slide, please. So Brian was telling me that it would be important to go through some basics about what a land trust is, and that's understandable because sometimes we at the Land Trust Alliance even get confused. That's tongue-in-cheek, but the land trust community is quite diverse and varied. These are state and local land trusts and even national groups, but the state and local land trusts are community-based, tax-exempt charitable organizations that work to conserve land in the public interests. Most, or at least a part of their mission, is to save land and to steward that land for conservation, cultural, and other purposes. And there are many names for land trusts, depending on the state law or local culture, but they can often be called conservancies or preserves, land trusts, or foundations. Next slide, please. So today, there are a total of 1,700 land trusts. So 1,200 of those are our members, and they have more than 100,000 volunteers working for them and 5 million members across the country. They vary greatly in size and budget. For instance, the Nature Conservancy is America's 25th largest charity, but 57% of all land trusts are run by volunteer boards. So it puts it in perspective with no paid staff. There is at least one land trust in every state operating. So these groups are local and regional and organized to protect resources that are important to the quality of life in their communities. Some serve one town, some multi-towns or multi-counties. Some are statewide or national, as I said. So the national groups include organizations like the Trust for Public Land, the Conservation Fund, and the Nature Conservancy, all groups that you on the phone have worked with and certainly have heard of. So land trusts also vary greatly in the purposes that they pursue and why they were formed. So the profile of a typical group varies greatly from state to state. You know, these organizations are sportsmen's and wildlife organizations, working land organizations out protecting farm and ranch land. They're urban land trusts, protecting parks, establishing community gardens. And there are groups that are focused on the balance of protecting water resources and view sheds. Next slide, please. This is a graph from our census data taken in 2010 that shows the amount of acres protected by state, local, and national land trusts. And you can see that almost 50 million acres, which is an area the size equivalent of, have been protected. It's dated information, so we'll be renewing here. But we know that the number of acres protected has undoubtedly increased significantly since this survey was taken. And then lastly, the National Land Trusts, like the Nature Conservancy, are responsible for conserving 30 million of the 50 million protected to date. Next slide, please. So this slide parses the acres protected data further and shows of the approximately 16 million acres protected by state and local land trusts, half of those acres were conserved by conservation easement, the primary tool used by land trusts to save land. Next slide, please. And this is where I want to focus a little more time just to talk a little bit about what conservation easements are and how land trusts use them, and then Michael will dig deeper on the practical use of these tools in the work of Skagit Land Trust. So land trusts use a variety of tools to do their work, including purchasing land outright and owning it. So owning land in fee, engaging in partnerships that result in land protection, where they may not hold the land, but have contributed to the fundraising to make it happen within their area of service. But the principal most successful tool to date has been the use of conservation easements. So in short, a conservation easement is a legal agreement in perpetuity between a landowner and a land trust or a government agency that permanently limits the use of the land in order to protect its conservation values. It does allow landowners to continue to own and use their land within, in terms of the use of the land within the constraints of the conservation easement, and they can also sell and pass it on to their heirs or other landowners. So to do this, land trusts work with willing landowners who want to donate their land and then hold that easement once it's finalized. And in doing that, the land trust has made a promise to steward and defend that easement in perpetuity. Many easement donors are eligible for special tax benefits depending on the nature of the deal, but oftentimes there is a tax benefit, an income tax benefit, and others that provide incentives for donation. So these easements have protected millions of acres of farmland, pristine natural areas, wildlife habitat, like this wetland and forest area you see in the slide, which was protected in the state of Georgia. Justin's Marsh, just to put this on the ground in southwest Michigan, where I'm based, my local land trust is the Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy. And in 2006, Jeffrey Money and his father Russell donated a really beautiful, diverse wetland property known as Justin's Marsh to the Land Conservancy. And the family had really grown to love the property. They formed a bond with it over the years, hunting and fishing on it. It's 86 acres of sugarloaf marsh here, and it's one of the most diverse botanical areas in the region, with over 400 species documented on the property. Next slide, please. So, akin to your Scaling Up initiative and the focus on large landscape scale conservation, the Alliance promotes landscape scale conservation across the country, and we have been doing so for years. I wanted to show you our most recent initiative called the Partnership for Gulf Coast Land Conservation. We formed it in 2010, and it has evolved into a coalition of 30 land trusts, local, state, and national, as well as other conservation organizations where we interface with federal and state agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, and USDA, and the state resource agencies. And we've really been able to influence the restoration effort that was prompted by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The 5th anniversary is coming up here. And we've really influenced the process to include land protection as a serious component of the restoration effort. So we're very proud of that so far. But we also completed a strategic conservation mapping project, as you see in the slide here. The maps include areas within the Gulf region that are of highest priority for protection and restoration by consensus among the partners. And the idea is to promote connectivity across the landscape, buffers for national parks and state resources. And of course, there are a number of very important national parks, as you know, situated along the coast, not the least of which is the Everglades and Gulf Islands National Seashore, where land trusts have been working with park staff to protect buffer areas of those parks. Next slide, please. Brian asked me to say a few things from the Land Trust Alliance perspective about how you can engage land trusts more effectively, and Michael will have certainly some ideas on that note. But if you're unfamiliar with or have little interface with land trusts, one of the best things you can do is go to our National Land Conservation Conference, or RALLY. It brings over 2,000 land trusts, conservation folks, government agencies to the table for 3 days of in-depth training, learning, networking, and a lot of fun. And this year it'll be in Sacramento, October 8th through the 10th. So you can register on our website if you're interested in that. Also, every year, depending on where you are in the country, usually in every corner, there are state and regional land trust conferences. And those are great local events, well done in almost every case. And you can find that schedule on our website as well, or if you know your local land trust service association, you can work with them directly to either get on the agenda or register. And then lastly, the most effective way to engage land trusts is to get involved with the ones that are working close by your resources. So attend their annual events, volunteer for them, like pulling invasive species at a preserve, offer to speak about the national park and how you can work together. And then also we have a nice little feature if you don't know your local land trust on how to find one. So it's called Find a Land Trust on our website. Next slide, please, Brian. So when you go to the Find a Land Trust page, it will show you a U.S. map. And you click on the state you're looking for a land trust in, and it will show you a county map like this in Washington. So if I were to click on Skagit County in the upper northwest corner there, a list of member land trusts working in that county would be presented. And in this case, you would click on the Skagit Land Trust. A list of demographic information and descriptive information would pop up, and a hyperlink to their website, so you could get right to them that way. There's also telephone numbers before you click through to their website, so you could just pick up the phone and call them directly using that page. And the last slide, Brian, please. So the Land Trust Alliance, one of our core programs is providing educational and information resources. So if you go to our website, and if you are a member, individual or government agency member, you can use our Learning Center. In both cases, we have a plethora of tools, resources, and publications, from technical publications to a 16-course curriculum that's relevant to others than land trusts. Although we designed it for land trusts, it's rich with content on conservation strategies and governance. And our award-winning quarterly magazine, Saving Land, is a really good publication that you would enjoy if you don't receive it already. And then lastly, the Learning Center contains a host of online learning groups where, essentially like a blog, you can ask questions, you can engage in conversations on particular issues with your colleagues and land trusts from across the country. So it's really an effective resource to get engaged with the land trust community online in this case. And with that, Brian, I will pause and turn it over to Michael.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And to Brian and to everyone on the call, I appreciate you taking time today to hear about Land Trust. So I'm Michael Kirschenbaum. I'm the Stewardship Director of the Skagit Land Trust. Just a very quick introduction. We're located north of Seattle. I have about 1,000 members that support us. We've protected over 6,000 acres of land, and we work in various environments. The picture you see on the right side of the screen there shows the Skagit River, which is the namesake river for the county and for the valley, flowing from its headwaters in North Cascades National Park. So those are peaks in the park in the distance there. So what I hope to do here is real briefly just give you some examples of how local conservation efforts here in Skagit County have interfaced with, benefited, and opportunities like that that we've had here with North Cascades that you might have in your local area. So next slide, please, Brian. So why should you care about working with land trusts? I think Aaron just did a great job giving you the big picture. When I kind of thought about it before this, it comes down to that word we hear a lot, which is connections, but it really is true for land trusts. I think they can be a bridge to a national park to look outside of its borders to the surrounding community in 3 key ways: for habitat, for the community itself, and for policy and political reasons. So I want to talk about the habitat part first and give an example of how that's played out over the past 20 years here, how habitat connectivity has evolved in Skagit County to really benefit not just the immediate areas protected, but also hopefully the national park. Next slide, please. So just to orient you real fast, that's Skagit County in the middle. You can see North Cascades National Park off to the right part, the eastern part of the county. Seattle is down to the south. Next slide. So zooming in a bit, you see the Skagit River flowing through the middle, North Cascades National Park to the right, its headwaters, and the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. This is the map of kind of conserved lands, more or less, of about 20 or 30 years ago. And over the past 20 or 30 years, through the work of not just the Skagit Land Trust, but a lot of other partner groups, the map looks like this. Go ahead, Brian. So all those green blobs are land that have been conserved over the past 20 or 30 years, and most of which are focused on the river corridor there. And you can see that that corridor leads right into the national park. It's a gateway for salmon that spawn from the Pacific, head up the Skagit, and then might end up spawning up in the national park. And it goes both ways. The glaciers of North Cascades National Park produce water in the summer that are key to making the Skagit one of the most important salmon rivers the entire west coast. So we're going to zoom in a little bit to show you what this means on a smaller scale. Go ahead, Brian. So we're going to look at what just happened over the past 20 years in that little small area. And the next one. This is 20 years ago. The only protected land on that stretch of the Skagit was that orange, 2 orange parcels owned by Washington State Parks. And next slide. And don't get caught up in what the different colors mean, but all of that is now conserved land along a key stretch of the Skagit. That's come about from the work of the Land Trust and local, state, federal, and tribal organizations. And we're starting to see progress. And sometimes this feels like the conservation work of the 21st century. The big blocks of land have been protected more or less and need defending and taken care of, but the land to acquire are these small parcels that are starting to knit together the landscape once again and provide those key connections, often in this case from North Cascades down to the sea. Next slide. So that's kind of on a habitat scale. why I think land trust can be a key way for national parks to connect with what's happening outside their borders. But there are other ways that are just as tangible. One is to kind of reach into the community and to build relationships with the people who live outside of the national park who might be supporters of what a national park does. I was amazed when I worked at North Cascades how, myself included, few people knew about the local conservation work that was being done. I hardly knew of Skagit Land Trust while I was working at the park, and now I'm amazed at how many people who live where the population centers are here and who might be very involved with local conservation work who don't know what the priorities and issues of the national park are. So we've really tried to recruit a lot of people who used to work or currently work for the national park to be volunteers. Who will, they might be retirees who can help us on projects in the field or serve on our board of directors. And that sharing of just people back and forth, I think, helps inform both the land trust and the local conservation community of what the key issues are in national parks, and then vice versa. It lets park employees and the surrounding and the people around them know what are the key conservation actions happening right outside their borders they might not hear about otherwise. And the next slide, Brian. And that can play out in a lot of important ways. You know, some of it benefits the land trust for volunteer work, and we've been able to tap into the Park Service expertise for speakers at events. We've worked directly on projects like invasive species control, but it can also go the other way too, in that engaging Park Service employees or retirees engaging with your local land trust can make sure the land trust and conservation partners know about the key policy and political goals of the Park Service. So what the slide on your screen right now shows that there's an environmental impact process going on right now in the North Cascades about grizzly bear reintroduction and grizzly bear habitat. You know, the Land Trust has a public policy committee, and we have a large membership base, and you know, we can be a conduit for letting the public know about those kinds of policy processes that are being driven by the Park Service, potentially build support for it. And then it puts it on our radar also for our conservation goals, so that looking at habitat might include now looking at grizzly bear habitat for the Skagit Land Trust. And those kinds of connections only happen if there's both a professional working relationship, but then if the community is shared, and that's where the individual involvement becomes very important. And last slide, Brian. So what can you do? You can share resources, and that might mean sharing speakers, as I mentioned. We had the North Cascades National Park geologists speak at our annual event, annual meeting a couple years ago to talk about glaciers in the national park, and it really informed our membership about the importance of the glacial snowpack or the glacial melt-off to salmon and other species in the Skagit River. There might be material resources, tools, and things like that that are available for volunteer work parties that will, you know, benefit indirectly the working ecosystem of the national park by improving the ecosystem around it. There's collaboration on common goals, so that might be things like working on invasive species control, being aware of those conservation efforts, both stewardship and for acquisition and planning that are going on outside of park borders. And then lastly, and I'll emphasize this again, to personally volunteer, get involved. Your labor, your expertise, and the connections that you bring to your local land trust will really benefit both your park, the Park Service as a general, and really benefit the organization, the land trust or the conservation group you're working for. People who work for the Park Service are often considered semi-celebrities in these conservation circles, so there's always a little kind of buzz in the group if somebody was a ranger at a national park.
Michael? Michael? Can everyone else hear me?
Yes.
Yep, go ahead, Brian.
Michael, you're there. Okay, sorry, I think you cut off. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, that was it. I was just encouraging folks to volunteer, so
okay.
I am, and that was my last thing.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, here's contact information for both Aaron and Michael, as well as that to the right, that awesome map that Aaron was referring to that's on their website. Just Google Land Trust Alliance, and you'll it's pretty easy to find this map where, again, you can find a local land trust near you. Let's see, are we on time? It's 4:28. Any questions for Aaron and Michael? Any at all?
This is Jennifer. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm just wondering if you all are involved in the large landscape cooperatives in any way, LCCs, which are sort of the big interagency and a federal agency, but also state and local and land trust and Nature Conservancy and many others are involved in these large landscape conservation efforts.
Michael, do you have do you work with LCCs in the Northwest? We have an example at the Land Trust Alliance I can talk about, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Aaron. I don't think we at Skagit Land Trust have directly worked with that, so go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so at the Land Trust Alliance, we've been trying to, over the past year or two, engage more the LCCs and connect land trusts with them. Specifically, we formed a partnership last year with the Open Space Institute to apply for funding to the North Atlantic LCC to help build some resources to promote climate change planning among land trusts, but also to help land trusts make better connections with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for instance, to access the tools that they have, and then vice versa, to sort of promote that public-private connection and partnership through the project. So that's a concrete example of how we're trying to advance our leverage of the LCCs and to help the LCCs become more effective over time and engaging with land trusts in this case.
That's great. Maybe a follow-up question to that is, you talked a lot about the community and just sort of there's a value of the land. The reason why people want to do the land trusts and the conservation easements is because people are finding this significant in a very personal way. I'm glad to hear that you are trying to help leverage and connect with LCCs. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Park Service, I'm in the National Capital Region, but I work with the Appalachian LCC, and they're very interested in trying to identify communities and place-based community information, and we have proposed to them this very thing, that they need to get more in touch with the land trusts and conservancies and other groups of people who value the lands that are already organized. So, well, I guess it's more just a comment that it's a good way to go, and encourage to keep doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Let me know how I can help with that. We obviously have a Southeast regional office, and we're heavily engaged in the Southern Appalachians in particular. So.
Okay, good. I might send you a quick email then. Great.
Great.
Well, great. It's 4:31. So with that, I just wanted to remind everyone of our internal Scaling Up Toolkit. There's a link. Sorry, folks who are on the phone who are not with the Park Service, but we have our internal Google site here that, again, has a link in the email that we send out. On the bottom left is you can join our email list. There's also a ton of other great resources on the website. I'm recording today's presentation, so this will also be posted here and linked in various ways to the toolkit. So hey, Michael and Aaron, you guys did an amazing job. Thank you. I mean, you guys really made a lot of important connections to how you all help us and how we can help you all, and at the end of the day end up with a more intact landscape surrounding parks. So thanks again.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.